Birtukan Midekssa is now a Reagan-Fussell Fellow at the National Endowment for Democracy, and so there's particularly meaning for you and for us, Birtukan, in your being here at the Reagan Library on this momentous occasion. She is a former federal judge in Ethiopia and a widely admired leader of the political opposition in Ethiopia, who has been forced into exile because of the extremely authoritarian regime there, and is a former political prisoner in Ethiopia. Myroslava Gongadze is a former journalistic crusader, investigative reporter in Ukraine, who now is again living abroad in the United States. She was a Reagan-Fussell Fellow at the National Endowment for Democracy, so you too can now, in a way, discover your roots, or those portions of them, and you'll see her in the film I'm about to introduce, and she now works for the Voice of America. Finally, Qiang teaches in the School of Information at UC Berkeley and edits the China Digital Times. He was a democracy activist in China, studying in the United States when the Tiananmen massacre happened on June 4th of 1989, and was a leader of human rights in China for many years and has remained again in exile in the United States. And we're very confident that, like Radwan, you will be able to go back to your countries someday as they transition to democracy. We're going to see now a short clip of a film that's been made about the global struggle for democracy, A Whisper to a Roar. The director and producer of that feature-length documentary film, Ben Moses over here, is with us today. This will run about 7 or 8 minutes, and then we'll bring our panel up on the stage. So I hope you enjoy the film clip.
Being a student leader in Chávez's Venezuela is dangerous.
Le propio toda la planta.
Robert Mugabe had no intention of sharing power with a former comrade.
Malaysia was a very strong authoritarian state. Mahathir had full control of the judiciary, the police, and the army.
There's been speculation that the Ukrainian opposition leader Viktor Yushchenko had been poisoned as he campaigned for the presidency.
Почему я без 4 машин милиции не могу никуда проехать в Крыму? Сволочи вы после этого!
This is an authoritarian regime ruled by the fiction of democracy.
Most of us journalists realized that once you challenge the government, which was trying to impose censorship, things could become dangerous. All of us knew the Georgi Gongadze story. He was a journalist very critical of Kuchma and his administration.
Georgi would ask tough questions. I mean, he would just, boom, he would just kill someone with his words.
Пане президент, чи вам не здається це парадоксальним? Люди завели роботу, за кордон винесли мільйони грошей, а ви їх нагороджуєте. Тут є два варіанти. Або дійсно ви покриваєте некомпетентних людей в силу тих же своїх якостей, по яких ви звільнили пана Лазаренка за станом здоров'я.
He would do what he feels right. This way, you create a lot of enemies around you.
Якщо він продавав і різницю вклав в карман, то хто його за це може звинувачувати?
Вам не здається, що це некомпетенція. Якщо люди не можуть довести провину злочинця, вони не повинні бути на своїх посадах. І вони компрометують вас в першу чергу. Нікого не цікавить, що Кравченко там знав чи не знав. Це його проблема.
По-перше, шановний, вибачаюся, не знаю, як вас звуть. Георгій, по-перше, це питання...
Георгій Гонгадзе.
Георгій, це питання Служби безпеки, а не питання Міністерства внутрішніх справ. А міліція, це криміналітет, пішло-поїхало.
And then nightmare began. Cars were following him, and on September 16, he didn't come home.
One day he was found beheaded, and it was quite obvious it was because of his profession, because of the job he was doing.
Decided to teach me a lesson in front of thousands of my supporters.
The whole system was used against Anwar to bring him down politically.
They stormed into my house.
If the government can use the different institutions in our country, which is supposed to be democratic, to arrest, detain, beat the second most powerful man in Malaysia, what hope is there for the rest of the citizens?
Witness? No. Medical evidence? No. Never mind. He's guilty.
I noticed that he was extremely ambitious. Of course, he would succeed me. If he had been patient, today he would be the Prime Minister.
We started seeing streams of women, children, men, some bent, some beaten, some broken bones, some... But I'm talking of a violent campaign that had engulfed the country. It engulfed the country.
How do you go into an election when the opposition is being battered? How do you go in an election when there is no freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, the media is banned? How do you go in an election when the machinery of running an election is militarized?
Our whole history has been bedeviled by the fact that rulers believe that people can't think. And they certainly can't think if they are voting against you.
السلام عليكم يا شباب، النهارده هنتكلم بشكل بسيط جدا ازاي نقدر نعمل درع يحمي جسمنا في مظاهرات بشكل بسيط.
عملنا فيديوهات حتى كمان قبل 25 بيشرح كيفيه تصنيع دروع تحمي الجسم من اي رصاص مطاطي او اي شبكات، لان كنا حاسين ان هيبقى يوم ضخم جدا وكنا ناويين مش زي كل مره نتضرب ونروح، لا ده احنا نازلين هنقعد.
I'm quite sure that sooner or later we'll keep going into the direction of a free, democratic country, and hopefully at some moment, at some point, it will also bring us good governance and prosperity.
احنا هدفنا الأساسي هو كيفية تغيير مصر نحو الديمقراطية. ومع الوقت هيبقى الوضع أحسن.
أنا متفائلة إن هيحصل تغيير في مصر بشكل إيجابي. تستحق إن تكون بلد ديمقراطية، شعبها بجد يستحق. متفائلة لأني ما أقدرش أعيش من غير أمل. مش هعرف أعيش من غير أمل.
We live by the day, we live by the conditions, and we exploit space that is available. This country cannot be an exception. If South Africa and other countries around us can allow their people the freedoms, the economic opportunities, and the hope that they has created, then why not us?
That's what politics is all about. That's what democracy is, to get people to have that passion to understand their rights and demand for their rights. You must, and as a Democrat, a person who believes in freedom and justice, you must trust in the wisdom of the masses.
Esto no depende de un héroe, esto no depende de una persona ni de un caudillo. Depende de todos los venezolanos y de la responsabilidad que asumamos con nuestro país.
¡Hay que votar! ¡Hay que votar!
Si uno se sienta a esperar que las cosas sucedan, no van a suceder. Si tú quieres algo, ve y hazlo.
So I'm going to be very unfair to my panelists because I've shared with them so they could prepare their thoughts some of the questions I wanted to ask them. But this film inspires me to start in a slightly different and impromptu way. There are several themes that run through this film. One is the universality of democracy. Another is the extraordinary risks, unfortunately, that people often have to take in order to struggle for it. We heard that President Toledo had more than 100 death threats before he finally became president, and some continued after he was elected. I'm often led to wonder, since I can't be sure that I would be willing to run those risks myself, why people do it. Birtukan, since you've been a political prisoner, maybe we can start with you. Why is it worth it to run these risks?
First of all, I would like to thank Nate and Carl for having me in this kind of panel. Actually, I was contemplating about the universality of the values of democracy and freedom. And I was thinking about the moment when I was in prison for the second time. And, you know, when I was in prison in 2005, a lot was happening, like election was taking place, and my party threatened the governing party in a very huge manner. And I knew I didn't commit any offense even by then. But in 2008, I was not even able to understand when I was in prison, you know. My offense was like making a statement, saying something, like a statement or two, expressing myself. It was about our release in the first round. So when I was in prison, they put me in a solitary confinement, and of course I was angry. I'm not angry now. It took me a lot to withstand that kind of feeling. But I was angry by the time. But, you know, most of the time I was alone. I didn't have anything to do. I have imaginary conversation with so many people. One was the prime minister. And I tried to understand how he was unable to understand that that was a very natural thing to speak out and to express oneself. And I was wondering how he didn't understand that he was able to express himself in many ways. Like, he was able to ridicule us even. He was lying, and he was able to do anything else. How can he didn't understand that, you know, I was just a person like himself? And of course, to my amazement, he was angry too. You know, when he made a statement to the public press, he was angry. He was not even, he didn't want to pronounce my name. He was referring to me like this woman. And he was angry that I defied him. I was not defying him. I was trying to be myself. So the whole thing makes sense. The risk we took, and, you know, all engagements and all commitments make sense. That, you know, the cause we are pursuing is very simple, it's very plain, and it's very intrinsic to our nature. It's just trying to be yourself. It's trying to be natural. And I think the genius of the fathers of the founding fathers of this country, you know, they were not being very intellectual. Of course, they were intellectuals as well, but they just concretized the things which were floating all over the world in all civilizations. They give it a word. They say it's self-evident. And, you know, so that makes it worth it, because it's not something, you know, it's not about different version of thought. It's not about school of thought. It's not about West and East. It's about being human, being a person.
Myroslava, we saw in the film, your family paid the ultimate price. I'm sure your husband, when he was sitting there with President Kuchma, never imagined that his courageous willingness to challenge corrupt authority could have such an awful consequence. But if you could reflect back on your experience in the struggle against authoritarian rule, I think you will relive a lot of fear as well as determination. So perhaps you could share with us your own insights into why people do this.
Yes, actually, I always ask my husband, why do you do what you do? And it's just because speaking the truth and being truthful and seeing what is right, what is wrong. And for him, seeing and speaking about it was like breathing his air. And then later, when he was gone, I became the same. I got the same determination to fight for justice, first of all for his justice, but for justice for all Ukrainians. You cannot. It's a very. You have to be pushed to some. I mean, they pushed my buttons. That's why I stood up. That's why I went out. That's why I organized that first Find Georgi, when we see in the movie when the young people went on the street. That was the first kind of democratic and the first uprising in Ukraine in 2001. But it's very important to understand that silence would not save you. If something happened, something like that happened, you do have to go out, you do have to speak, and you have to help others to understand and stand for their rights. And if you take that stand, if you have enough courage to stand and take your stand, other people will follow you. And that's called leadership. Without that, you would not be able to have any movement and any democracy in any country.
And we do take note of the color of your blouse today, commemorating the Orange Revolution. Well, 23 years ago, yesterday, Xiao, was the horrific crackdown in Tiananmen Square, which reminds us again of the price people pay when they rise up for freedom. What do you think motivates people in China? The word we often hear is Asian values, satisfaction with authoritarian developmental success. The Chinese, or people in Asia more generally, are different. They don't share our values.
Well, thank you for starting with this meaningful day. That June 4th, 1989, which was yesterday, was 23 years anniversary in China, when the massacre happened on the street of Beijing, tanks and machine guns shot down thousands of the protesters, peaceful protesters. It's also a personally important day for me because before that, I was a 28-year-old astrophysics PhD student, came from China, studied cosmology at the US. And it will be 23 years anniversary of tomorrow. It's mine because that day, 2 days after the massacre, I get on an airplane, return to China. I was the only one from China getting on a plane that landed in China that trying to do something for the movement. Since then, I've been working for democracy and human rights for the rest of my life until today. And that was also my last time was in China. Yes, this 23 years, China took a very interesting turn. 2 years after the massacre, Deng Xiaoping basically made a deal to the Chinese people that have witnessed all the communist and totalitarian regimes collapsed in the Eastern Soviet Europe and Soviet Union. And after the Tiananmen massacre, Deng Xiaoping basically said, if we let the economic freedom that develop and giving to the people make chance to make money, and the people will take their bargain and do not challenge the one-party dictatorship of the Chinese Communist Party. Too many ways that deal worked. We witnessed this incredible growth of the Chinese economy under a totalitarian regime, actually precisely because of this one-party system, can have no labor union, can take the land from the people without hesitation at any price, and can let no independent press, can let any environmental degradation happens in order to serve the economic growth as their only legitimacy of the power. And in the globalization environment, China created an incredible growth for the last 23 years. But I refuse to call that a miracle, as it is impressive it is. Because China has not answered the question that dignity should come with the economic well-being. China has not answered the question of human justice in a society that can be expressed and protected that in such a rapid, profound change in society. Let me say something very clearly here. 23 years later, we can see this clearly. That kind of China myth is over. China still has to face the same question that people want to eat, people also want to vote. People want social justice, people want human dignity, want fundamental freedom, and want a government to be accountable to them, including all the economic growth. That expectation is only higher, not lower. I'll say one more point on this 23 years later reflection. That now one of my projects is watching the Chinese internet to see what's being censored, what's being managed, and what's being actually expressed by the millions of netizens. And yesterday, my research team found out over 100 of the words are being blocked by the search engine of the Chinese microblogging services. Because if you search those words, people will talk about nothing but Tiananmen Square 23 years. And what these words are, you'll be impressed. Yeah, June 4th, no, you can't search that. 1989, no, you cannot search that. 23 years, no, you cannot search that. Today, anybody mention the word today can't be good because they're all talking about that. No, you cannot search that. Tomorrow, no.
Oh my God.
Because that means something people always coming back to talk about this anniversary. For 23 years, I've never seen such level of public opinion and such level of nervousness manifested. You can actually detect it by the level of censorship and level of public opinion on the internet vividly under my program. So this is to say China has not answered the question. 23 years later, we moved on. We built up the strong economy. Then we can justify what we did. No, the fear is pervasive.
We'll come back to that. Radwan, speak to this question of motivation, if you wish, but also you're going back and forth between Washington and the Arab world. I know you're not only spending a lot of time in Tunisia, but that you travel widely in the Arab world. So assess for us, if you can, where the Arab Spring or Arab Awakening or whatever we want to call it stands now.
Well, thank you, Larry. First of all, I just flew 22 hours from Tunis through Dubai to make it here for one main reason, which is to thank Carl Gershman and the National Endowment for Democracy. The NED has supported us for the last 10 or 12 years, has stood by us through thick and thin, and has supported hundreds of activists and organizations in the Arab world. And for that, we are really eternally grateful. What motivated me to do this work, although I have a PhD in engineering, which is not related to any of this, are basically three things. When I was a high school student in Tunisia, before I came to the United States, at the age of 17, I was arrested for my student activism and spent 1 week, only 1 week, at the Ministry of Interior, which, as you know, is where the revolution happened last year. I personally was not tortured, but for day and night, I was hearing people crying and shouting and in pain for a whole week. To the point that I wished they would come and torture me, believe me. I mean, I felt like the torture of hearing those cries was bigger than if I was being myself tortured. So that really impacted me even when I was 17 years old. And then 6 months later, I got a scholarship to come to the United States and study engineering. And I often say that America ruined me because I learned freedom. I learned to speak up my mind. I learned to feel free and say whatever is on my mind. So when I finished my degree in 1992, I couldn't go back to Tunisia because Ben Ali had already risen to power. And I knew I wouldn't last very long outside of jail. So I stayed 10 years without going back to Tunisia, even to visit my family. And then I think the third thing that really affected me is all the rhetoric that we kept hearing when I was here in the United States about Islam not being compatible with democracy, or the Arab world is not ready for democracy, or the Arab culture is not compatible with democracy, or we will never be able to overthrow these regimes. I really felt insulted every time I heard these statements being made. So that's what motivated me, to focus on democracy and to promote democracy throughout the Arab region, as you said. I think now the Arab world, I knew for the last 10 years, and we've had discussions about this, that these regimes were very unstable, that the people were fed up, that the revolutions were coming, that explosions were going to happen sooner or later. We worked very hard to convince the American administration to stop supporting regimes like Ben Ali and like Mubarak. And I'm very glad that over the course of the last 10 years, I think the American administration did shift its policy. And I think policymakers, both Democrats and Republicans, became convinced that it was a mistake to support oppressive regimes, and that this was counterproductive and not in the interest of the American people or the American, of America. And therefore, and that also it was one of the main reasons for the rise of fundamentalism, of extremism, and all these problems that we are having in the Arab world. So now, it's really great that, finally this has happened, and the people in Tunisia started first, as you know, about 18 months ago, and then it quickly spread to Egypt, Libya, and Yemen, and now in Syria. As we speak today, people are fighting to the death, for their freedom and for their dignity in Syria, and demonstrating peacefully, even though, they know they are being shot at by the army, and every day 50 and 100 people are being killed by the murderous regime of Assad. And yet this has not stopped it. To me, this is what's amazing. People are still coming out in the street, even though they know they have a high chance of dying, and that these shooters were snipers were killing a lot of them every day. Again, I mean, what it tells me is that life without freedom is not worth living.
Yeah.
You know, that's the lesson.
And what about the progress in Tunisia? How do you assess where Tunisia is at today?
Well, I think I'm very optimistic about Tunisia. I think Tunisia has all the ingredients for a successful democracy. That's why I think why it started in Tunisia, where the Arab Spring or the Arab Awakening started in Tunisia. Tunisia has a strong middle class, has a good educational system, entrenched women's rights in Tunisia. So, and the army also has always and historically stayed out of politics and out of corruption. So there are many good ingredients that Tunisia has that I think Tunisia, I believe, will be the first country, you know, will be the trendsetter in the Arab world in terms of democratization. And we know that, you know, it's easier to remove a dictator than to build a democracy. You know, that building the institutions of democracy and the culture of democracy is going to take time. It's not easy. But I think Tunisia is ready to make that transition, you know, although it takes time and we have to be patient and it's not going to be easy. But I think Tunisia ultimately will succeed. There are still a lot of political and economic challenges, especially on the economic front, actually, is I think where I'm really worried about Tunisia.
Birtukan, there's been a certain amount of democratic progress in Africa. At least a third of the states of sub-Saharan Africa are democracies of one kind or another, but unfortunately your country is not one of them. So how do you assess what's happening in the region, and why is Ethiopia lagging so far behind in terms of democracy?
Larry, actually, when the democratic wave came to Africa in the 1990s, my country, one of the countries with, you know, a promising future. Actually, if you remember, there was this word coined as the new bridge of African leadership, and Prime Minister Midekssa Zenawi was one of them. And to be honest with you, in 1990s, you know, we enjoyed at least limited space. You know, if you ask me, I was a 12th grader when Midekssa and his friends came to power, and it was a new scenario for people like me. You know, politicians would come together and debate about issues, and we were having access to 20, 30 newspaper, and you know, that was very new for our political track. And of course, even during that period, you know, the commitment was halted, basically because this group which came to power was not really committed to democracy. Basically, they had Marxist-Leninist origin, and they were, in a way, forced by the global development to adapt the notion of democracy, rule of law, and other things. So, but for us, for the people, even with that kind of hybrid approach, we were able to exercise those rights in somehow a limited way. But something different happened in 2005. Even in that case, mostly for the international consumption purpose, that the party opened up the space for political opposition, and the political opposition was able to more organize, and I was the second person to the major opposition. We had access to public media, and the people were excited. And you know, in a way, the public even surprised us. You know, people were able to come out in millions to demonstrate their political views, just in a very civil way. And even during the election day, you know, they were very disciplined. They stayed in line for hours, and they, you know, they really understand in their own way that they can have, you know, they can be in charge in their own destiny, and they can change their government through ballot box. So that is not acceptable in the side of the government. So things changed starting from the day of election, and the violence was instigated by the government, and hundreds of people were killed and thousands of people were incarcerated, including myself. So by then, the government became very blunt about it. no more debate or no more play about democracy. That was it. All the space closed for the parties, for the private media, for the civil society, and it became very technical and illegal, autocratic. So there are two reasons for in the government side to approach and to progress in this direction. 2005 was not 1991. In 1991, the West was watching all over Africa. They were freer to promote democracy. But 2005, there is this issue of, the strategic interest with regards to war on terror. There is this issue of China. So they were reluctant to do so. And Meles and his friends, they were sure they will get away with it. And then they just closed every space. And even they became some kind of ideological narratives for the first time. And they tried even to ridicule liberal democracy and those notions which are wrongly coined as Western notions, which I believe they are universal notions. So basically it's the two reasons which orients this kind of approaches, their determination to stick to power by any means, and the fact that they took for granted the support they get from the international community.
We're going to come back to the international dimension in a minute. Myroslava, we were talking last night, as we have repeatedly, about the political trajectory of your country, which has many of us worried. Is Ukraine still a democracy today, and how do you assess what's happening there?
I honestly don't think Ukraine were a democracy at all. To understand what I mean, we have to look back what happened really in early 90s or late 80s, early 90s. When Soviet Union collapsed, the so-called democratization was introduced from the elite. Gorbachev understood, and maybe with the help of our American friends, as yesterday we talked about it with Madeleine Albright, he understood that a country would not be able to survive without some changes in the policy. So he introduced so-called perestroika, new like free rules for free economy and some new political game. But we have to understand that it was not really a democracy. It was the change of the society, nor society, neither elite understand what democracy is. So there was two things that they were fighting for. They were fighting for national identity, if we talked about society, and they were fighting for economic survival. So they did not understand, they didn't ask for what is freedom, what is accountability, what is election. There was not an issue. The issue was national identity and economical survival. So in late 90s, basically, since the countries received independence and people really received some way to support themselves, demobilization started. So if we're talking about former Soviet Union, we have to understand that in my view, the first democratic revolution happened exactly in 2004, 2005, with Orange Revolution, with Rose Revolution in Georgia, with revolution in Kyrgyzstan. So that was the first electoral revolution, when people went on the street to want more freedom, want their votes to be counted, and want justice for all. So what happened after that? The 4 years after the Orange Revolution, I think both civil society and new democratic leadership made a lot of mistakes. First of all, civil society were able to mobilize themselves but they were serving, they were taking a role as servant to the elite. They were able to mobilize, organize the revolution, push the changes, push leadership into power so Yushchenko could become a president. But then they were expecting that this leadership who promised them whatever they asked for, who promised to do all the reforms in the country, would be able to do that. It did not happen. And leadership really didn't have their act together. They didn't have a plan. They didn't have a program. They didn't know what to do with the power they got. And they start rolling was their, like, what they kind of intuitive way. I've been to, after Orange Revolution, I left Ukraine in 2001, and I left because it was really, really dangerous for me to stay there. I organized all these movements after Georgy death, and I mean, I was followed as well, and I had 2 small kids. I had to do something for them. It was not about me, it was mostly about my kids. And, but after Orange Revolution, I had to go back. And I was invited to work in foreign ministry, and I said, okay, I almost packed my bags. I went there in 2005 in April, and I told that story to Larry. And I talked to the president, to head of his administration, to foreign minister, to security service, to everyone. And I realized that they would have a major crisis very soon. They don't know what to do. And there was a lot of political, internal fighting in the elite. So basically that's what happened. The crisis evolved, and I mean, there was a lot of internal, like, blame. Yushchenko blamed Tymoshenko, Tymoshenko blamed Yushchenko, so there was a mess, the mess. So what happened? People were disappointed, disillusioned, and they elected a new president. President Yanukovych, who actually they stood up against on frozen Maidan in 2004. They elected a new leader who, in 2 years, created, in my view, very, very dangerous regime. He controlled all the branches of government now. He not completely controlled the press, but press, even there is a lot of media freedom, nobody paying attention to what media has to say. The investigation that journalists do doesn't go anywhere. So you can talk how long you want. We would not do anything about it. Corruption, we are on the level of Zimbabwe. The corruption, I mean, it just spread it like a cancer in the country. So prediction, I am very pessimistic on the short run, but I'm optimistic in the long run. I don't think this was this new, we talked about new technology yesterday as well, and I don't think it's this new era in the world, the trend in the world to empower individuals, to communicate freely. So in maybe 5, 10, 20 years, I think democracy has not even future, it will prevail. And, but things has to be done. And first of all, it's simple way. It help to empower individuals as National Endowment for Democracy do and does, and strengthen civil society. And it's not about even, you don't it's better to work with small organizations, small grants, as you guys do, on a local level, because I think new leadership, I don't know about other countries, but in our part of the world, in Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, the new leadership will grow from the local, on the local level. And we need to help them, to strengthen them to do their job, and let them do their job.
Xiao, feel free to reflect on this question of what can be done from the international side. I want to ask it of all of our panelists, but I also want you to address, it's clear in speaking about the future, you think, as I think a growing minority anyway of analysts of China think, that there's a coming crisis, and it's not 20 years in the future. But reflect on the dramatic developments of the past few months with the arrest of the Chongqing party boss, Bo Xilai, the divisions this has exposed within the regime, the dramatic escape and then confrontation around and then exile of the famous human rights lawyer Chen Guangcheng, and what all of this means on the eve of a historic every 10-year rotation of party leadership.
Well, I mentioned this fundamental issue of the authoritarian regime in the 21st century, in the information communication revolution era, has a fundamental flaw to justify its legitimacy to its own people. Even as fast-growing the Chinese economy has been, the ruling elites has been still facing that issue, that deep inside there's insecurity and instability that pervasive. In the ruling elites, I'm not talking about the people who gain nothing and discontent throughout this urbanization and economic growth. And that's the anger and the discontent sort of boiling for social justice. The recent events we just watched, whether it's the party boss Bo Xilai, who's an ambitious, charismatic politician aiming to compete, to get into the highest power, and on the opposite, a blind villager that just trying to help his fellow villagers and being persecuted by local authority, in the end, created a national sensation, become an inspiration of the activism, and later on become an international focus. Tell us many things about today's China and indicate how things will evolve tomorrow. And I'm going to just mention three. The first is that the Chinese communist regime, I think any communist regime, that always facing a fundamental problem of highest power transition. Who qualify as a next leader? Too much at stake, too much power, and too vicious and fighting in a black box. Even imperial dynasties, at least the rule is clearer, which is the oldest son. So that provides some kind of stability to know who is going to be the next one. When you don't even have that, you don't have election, you don't have anything else, then everything is in a black box, but it's too much at the stake. And the China concern, in the People's Republic of China, nothing has been smooth and in order for the highest power transition, except the last one, which is 10 years ago. People thought maybe the Chinese leadership solved their problem of institutionally transition of the power. Today, it's clear that was actually an exception. And political analysis can go into ask why that exception happened. But today, China facing the same issue of there's no clear rule and a clear institutional structure to making the highest power transition. Therefore, this scandal we saw is just only the indicator of that crisis. Second, it's a legitimacy crisis through the corruption. Just because of this vicious political struggle, then revealed the level of corruption, the level of money Bo Xilai's family has, and smuggled out of China, to he cannot be an exception at that level. And why? Yes, okay, he's a very high official, he's very corrupted, just like others, he gets this much money, but why? He smuggled all this money and his family to not within China, even for people as powerful as him. Why his son has to get the Oxford and Harvard degree, and his wife has to get some kind of identity from another country. Now, these we're talking about Politburo members in China and competing for the highest leadership. It only tells us one thing. Even him, even people like him, does not have confidence for the Chinese regime in the future. If the people ruling China doesn't have a confidence for its regime in the future, not even mention the rest of the people. And that is something we would have to deeply concerned. Finally, the third thing. Through both two incidents, what we see. The Chinese authority, in order to cover all these damages, sort of trying to again blame United States, Western hostile forces, and they trying to disturb China. They don't want China to be strong. And therefore, the party's agenda is to sort of, in this international environment, holding the country together. That nationalistic propaganda had been worked for a while, relatively, up to 2008 Olympics. And now, that kind of discourse, that kind of argument lost its attraction among the intellectuals, elites, and you can watch that clearly online, that public opinion is not goes for it. So when a country has a deep insecurity, have a problem with legitimacy and power transition, and corruption, and lost its sort of argument why it's staying in power, what happens if the Chinese economy growing slower and even stall? I cannot imagine what all the other problems were boiling over and pointing to the economic crisis or becoming a political crisis, just like many other countries will see. Two things may happen. One, for the good, is the crisis will force the leadership opening up. They have to change. And the direction of change, hopefully, is for more openness. But another more darker scenario is also possible, which is they will point an external enemy. They'll create an issue in southern China Sea with Japan, with who knows, Taiwan or United States, in order to shift the attention and control the domestic discontent. It's not such a far-fetched scenario. And even we're here in the spirit of democracy trying to project the long-term future, but in the short term, I'm afraid we have to watch both.
Very good. I want to open it up soon to our audience, but if you each could address this last question of what's the role of the international community? What's the place of external efforts to assist democracy, and what do people, to begin with you, Radwan, in the Arab world today, expect of international democratic forces in terms of partnership or assistance, and what perhaps don't they want?
Well, first of all, I think that international support is extremely important and necessary. The first rule, of course, is to do no harm, and by that I mean stop supporting dictators. I think that's the first thing, especially in the Arab world. There are still plenty of dictators out there, and many of them have close ties with the United States, and we have to stop supporting them, just like we did with Mubarak and with Ben Ali and others. Then we have to really focus on what's happening right now in these 4 countries that have already undergone the revolutions, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Yemen. I personally think that we need to focus on Tunisia, and not only because I'm Tunisian, but I've been traveling in the Arab world, as you know, Larry, for the last 12 years on a monthly basis to all the Arab countries. And I really believe that Tunisia is the best case scenario, is where we have the most chance of success And
of creating a model of democracy.
Creating a model for democracy in the Arab world. And that failure in Tunisia, I think, will be catastrophic for the region. Because if we fail in Tunisia, it will be that much harder in Libya or Egypt or Yemen or any of the other countries. So I think we really need to be focused on Tunisia for the next year or two. We need to make sure we succeed in Tunisia. And then that model will be an inspiration, will be guidance, will be encouragement to the others, where I think it will take longer and it will be more difficult, but it really helps to see a model succeed. In Tunisia, of course, there are many challenges, but I think the main challenge is the economic challenge. The political transition takes time, and this is what we need to realize. We have elected the Constituent Assembly that's currently writing a constitution that is expected to finish writing a new constitution by December of this year. And then we will elect a new government next year, like in March or something like that, a new government, a new parliament, which then we have to write all the new laws. And so building the democratic institutions itself will take several years, 3 or 4 years at least. And the problem is, how can you do that when you are in the midst of economic turmoil, of extreme poverty, and the youth in particular? The youth are the ones who revolted, who started the revolution. They are not patient. They want to see improvements in their lives now.
They want jobs.
They want jobs. And so you have this, we need to buy time, is what I'm saying and what I'm thinking. Tunisia needs time, needs real economic support from the United States and the international community in the form of something like a Marshall Plan. If we want democracy to succeed in Tunisia and in the Arab world, we really have to support it. And these difficult next 2 or 3 or 4 years are going to be critical. And something like a Marshall Plan will buy time, will stabilize the economy enough for the political process to take hold and succeed.
Birtukan, what about sub-Saharan Africa and your country, Ethiopia? What would you like to see from the international community, and what's the place of international democracy assistance?
Larry, before just pointing out what could be done from the international community side, let me try to express what I observed in the side of the international assistance to democracy. I think we don't have a problem in terms of rhetoric. Every major power wouldn't come out and say, no, we don't need to support democracy. But when you come to practical actions, and when you look into some kind of nuanced discourse and debates, especially like on the issue of in the issue of economic development or in the issue of international security, you can sense that the international debate is lacking some kind of steam when it comes to supporting democracy and putting the issue of freedom and democracy at the first priority. So I think both in the with respect to the moral principles and in terms of protecting the legitimate interest of the international community and the major powers in the long term, it needs to have some kind of synthesization, to convince policymakers to support democracy everywhere else. To come to the sub-Saharan Africa, I think compared to other regions, obviously, the international community has more leverage to pursue the cause of democracy. The major reason being, most of the states basically sustain, as a result of the aid money they are receiving from the international community. That gives basically more leverage for the major powers. And, the major strategic interest those the US and the other major powers are trying to protect is the issue of security and the issue of the interest against terrorism. But in a way, if you analyze it and if people give the time to go through all the details, what's going on in every part of the country, you would easily realize that everything happening is kind of jeopardizing those interests in long term. If you take the case of Ethiopia, for example, this regime is, suppressing strongly held interests. Our country is quiet. It seems like security is being taken for granted. But those things, those suppressed interests, they are creating, a potential for, future conflicts. It's simmering underneath. Yeah. So basically, while the international community has a chance to intervene now and immediately and try to create, a transition to democratic, form of government, which ventilates those kind of interests and, potential for conflicts, in a way by postponing that kind of assistance, the country is kind of posing for a scenario of Syria. By then it would be very late and it would be very complicated and, all those kinds of things. So, as I already said, the international community could understand how vast leverage they have with regards to sub-Saharan countries. And, they should realize how they are jeopardizing those interests. So, even now, if, basically, the development aid, the humanitarian aid shouldn't stop. You can implement, effective monitoring and evaluation system, and you should like control and monitor those regions to not use those money to stifle dissent. And you can incorporate the issue of democracy in the package of those assistance and everything. And the other option would be engaging civil society and non-state actors to lead the region and its respective countries towards democratic transition at some point. So there are a lot of things that could be kind of done by the international community.
Very good. Well, we have about 15 minutes left. Let's see if we have questions or comments from our audience here. Would anyone like to ask a question of our panelists? Yeah, we have a mic. The lights are a bit... okay,
Hi,
please stand up. Introduce yourself if you'd like.
Hi, I'm Camille Alec. I'm with Most Resource. We work with Hollywood on issues about the Muslim world or people of those backgrounds. And Radwan, I'd like to ask you, we were all excited to watch many of the uprisings both in Tunisia and in Egypt. And we had brought one of the organizers from Tahrir Square to meet with some of the TV shows here to talk about that organizing effort. Since then, we've sadly seen a lot of changes. We had spoken about the United States and how we would have to deal with Islamists in forms of democracy. But we've also seen Egypt particularly take a very strong turn towards ultra-conservatism, arresting of filmmakers and the such. How would you recommend diplomacy efforts move forward with these types of things happening in Egypt, also in Tunisia with the Salafis? And how within those countries can we empower those youth and young leaders who would like to stay, although they were under corrupt secular governments? How do we encourage them to move forward in a way that continues how they rose up?
That's a very good question. I think that obviously the issue of Islam and democracy and secularism and the relation between religion and the state is going to be a difficult issue in the Arab world and in these new democracies. And again, I think it takes time. I think we have to be patient. I think it takes time for people to realize, the best, or find the best compromise. In Tunisia, and one of the reasons that I'm more optimistic about Tunisia, the Islamic movement in Tunisia, which is called Al-Nahda, has already stated that they're not going to insist on Sharia being mentioned at all in the constitution. So that they've already eliminated a big issue of concern and disagreement between the Islamists and the secularists. And we also have a troika government, which is a coalition of Islamic party and two secular parties that are in coalition governing together. I think in Egypt it's going to be a little bit more difficult. Egypt is more conservative than Tunisia. Tunisia has been historically more secular than Egypt. The rise of Salafism, I think, is a big concern in both countries, in Tunisia and in Egypt, but it's even more so in Egypt, where they got, the Salafist party got 25% of the vote. But I think, you know, again, it takes time we have to have these debates, and these debates will take a long time. But ultimately, I am really convinced that what people are looking for in Tunisia as well as in Egypt and in the Arab world is a civil state, not a religious state. It's a civil state that respects religious values, but they are not interested in a theocratic state which is led or managed or directed by the religious establishment or by the religious clerics, you know, like we have in Iran, for example. And I think we are very lucky, actually. The timing is really good that we have a successful model in Turkey, which is really now driving a lot of people, you know, to emulate or try to get as close as possible to the Turkish model. Even Islamists in the Arab world and Tunisia and Egypt and all that are really impressed with the Turkish model, because it's a model that is secular but also respects Islamic values and religious values. So I think overall this is the direction that the region is going to go to, or to go towards. But again, it will take time, because for 23 years or longer we haven't had debates about all these issues, about the role of religion and politics and how we respect, what does it mean to have a democratic state, or even secular. What is secularism? It's not really understood in the Arab world. In many cases, people think secularism is atheism or against religion, or which is not the case, as we know, especially like here in the United States. So it takes time. We have to be patient. We have to support the process, and these debates will take place, and I think ultimately, and again, that's why Tunisia has to succeed. This is why it's critical that Tunisia has to succeed.
Okay, other questions? Yes, Mark Plattner.
Thank you. Mark Plattner, Journal of Democracy. I'd like to ask Xiao a question. You mentioned two scenarios, one a more hopeful one leading to democratization in China, another a darker one that would lead to rise of nationalism and international conflict. Let me ask you to say not which of them is more likely, but what are the factors that will influence it? How crucial will U.S. policy, Western policy be, or will it largely depend on internal developments in the country?
Short answer is, of course, I don't really know. But I can say something very concrete, but can give us some idea of where the possible hope is. The China today, Chinese society today, is no more an isolated island. As vast as it is, the internet penetration to over 500 million people. And there's no way you can govern a population by simply control and fear when that kind of connectivity and the potential of organizing collective action can happen in a society. Doesn't matter how many police you have, how many intelligence you have, and how much firepower you have. People want the same thing. And people know today what happened in the Middle East, what happened in Burma, what happened, most importantly, in Taiwan. And that's caused to, even just 10 years ago, when governments say something about it, we're going to take Taiwan back, it's a separate part of China, and it's something that will galvanize a lot of nationalistic sentiments. Not anymore. The latest very concrete joke, but it's actually happened, it's not a joke, it's a real conversation, was spreading on the Chinese internet, was during the Taiwan election this spring. And you know, we all know there's a lot of Taiwanese businessmen doing business in Shanghai. And they work together with their Chinese partners and the mainland partners. And this is the one Chinese microblogger who has a Taiwan businessman friend. They always drink together. They talk about fashion. They talk about women. They talk about business. They talk about whatsoever. And that day, this Chinese businessman wrote a post saying, well, tonight I had a drink with my Taiwanese partner. And he said, oh, I cannot stay very long because I have to go back to vote. So I said, do you have to go now? He said, yeah, I'm going to vote now, and I'll know the result tomorrow. And then the Chinese businessman wrote, I suddenly felt thoroughly ashamed. I didn't know what to say to him. The only thing I could have to say is, well, you Taiwan people are so backward. If this is mainland, if tonight is our election, we already know the result.
Exactly.
And that post being commented and retweeted 30,000 times before the censor come in to stop it. So people know. That's my point. And people is aware what's really there. And that is indication that tomorrow, yeah, the things will move, hopefully, to the better space.
I want to just one sentence
to
follow, maybe, to follow that. I just want to, I don't think that Putin or President of China or whatever, any autocratic leader understand that democracy is the common value. And I don't think it makes sense even to talk to them about it, because they have their own issues and their own agenda to hold on to power. But one thing I want to just remind, I think Lincoln said that you can fool some of the people all the time, and most of the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. So you better become a Gorbachev and live your life in rest and freedom and esteem for generations to come, because the end is inevitable for them. So.
Very good. Well, on that note, I'd like to thank our 4 remarkable panelists for the courageous and principled work they've been doing, and express our hopes for and conviction about the ultimate triumph of democracy in each of your countries. It's my pleasure to let you all know that this is one of the aspects of the day I've really been looking forward to. Not so much the lunch, but the place where it's going to occur. Lunch will be served in the Air Force One pavilion. I'm going to ask you to exit to my left over there, and staff will escort you. And thank you all for a wonderful morning.